Ciao.
I'm here today to review Let's potato chips. Oh, say get this sucker open.
Well, I have not watched the shows you have watched, and therefore I have ruined your show.
You have watched some of the shows that I've watched, though.
Yeah,
That's Shelly Brisbin, by the way. Everybody, Shelly Brisbin is here with us, host of Parallel. Tell me I said it right.
You did. You got
Excellent. Host of Parallel, which people can find where?
At relay.fm/parallel.
And I think people who have heard this show before, have heard you on the show before, know what it is. But would you remind them, please?
Parallel is a tech podcast with accessibility sprinkles, by which I mean we talk about technology, but we include an accessibility perspective. Sometimes it's a little accessibility. Sometimes it's a whole lot.
You've watched some of the Star Trek shows.
I have.
You've seen Happy Days?
I have.
Yeah, okay. So you've watched some of the shows I've watched then.
Okay, well, there you go. Going back to the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. Sure, yeah, I have watched those shows.
Yeah, exactly. Are you watching Lower Decks?
I am.
Oh, man. That is the most Star Trek thing since the Orville.
It's fun, and it was one of those that I didn't love on the very first episode because I was like, people are yelling and being zany, and I just gave it a chance, and I enjoy it. It's fun. Yeah,
I joke that it's the most Star Trek thing since the Orville, but I do honestly think that it is probably the most Star Trek thing since, I want to say, Next Gen, maybe. Or maybe you could say Voyager. I mean, because at the end of the day, even though it is kind of crazy and somebody might lose a leg and there are things that you would never want to have happen in the room with either your grandchildren or your grandparents. At the end of the day, that whole crew is just about each other. That whole crew is about supporting each other and making sure everybody can be the best they can be.
Yeah, and it happens on the ship. The ship is an important character on the show, even though they go off and have your usual alien encounters. But it feels like for Star Trek to work as Star Trek, the ship has to be a big character.
I agree. Anyway, that's not what we're talking about today. We're just talking about the fact that we watched some, because I was going to talk about something else, but we'll move it to tomorrow. Because, there's a thing.
When I'm not paying attention, I'll just be like, well, minding my own business. And Ken will be like, that thing I was going to talk to you about yesterday. Well, here we are. We're back.
Yeah, like that. But what we're actually talking about today, we're back to form, because last week, I think Apple had their earnings call, and then we wanted to talk about something else. And we never got to what was news to whoever was on last week. Starts with a B. Can't remember. Anyway, I know, right? Come to think of it, one of your names starts with a B.
One of my names does. Yeah. That's right.
You weren't on last week, were you?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, mysteries that'll never be solved. Anyway, we're back to a regular routine here, which includes Monday being turned over to the guest. Shelly Brisbin is the guest. There is something in the news I feel certain that she has been following that I may not have been, or maybe I have been and she just wants to talk about it more. I'm curious, when I say it is news to you, Shelly, what's news to you?
Well, this one is about the chip shortage. Wait, we all know about that, right? Well, Here's interesting stuff, because the sort of top line view has been, it's all about the pandemic. Oh my God, there's no chips for anything. Mm-hmm. And Wall Street Journal, Christopher Mims did a story for Wall Street Journal this weekend, which basically sort of teases out how much of the chip shortage is about a shortage in devices that make chips, but not the newest chips, older chips. These devices are 10 years old or more, and they are designed to make chips that are not the cutting edge, like the kind that actually power your iPhone or your laptop, but the kind that are in the sensors in your car or in your Internet of Things devices, or even in devices that make other chips. And there's a shortage of these devices and a shortage for parts for these devices. And so there's just this huge backlog that's apparently been going on for 5 years or so, but the pandemic did exacerbate it, both because factories closed, fabs closed, and because people were asking for more, work from home stuff. So I thought that was interesting.
I will say I appreciate that explanation of it, because that is a better explanation than we've gotten from Apple. Because for the past 2 or 3 earnings calls, I want to say, Tim Cook would say, well, it's not the chips, that power your iPhone, it's the legacy node. And I'm like, well, I don't know what that means. I don't know what that is. And I know I could look it up, but my point is, when he stands out there, it's not even that, you're saying?
Yeah, because if you think about the chips that go into the iPhone aren't just the CPUs, that the A15s or the M1s in the new MacBooks. Mm-hmm. They're also the chips that are in the camera sensors. They're the chips that are the radios that power the cellular service, the Wi-Fi radios. Right. All those things have chips in them. And we always think in terms of CPU chips, but everything has got a microchip in it. And the design of that microchip may be older because you don't need that cutting edge, or frankly because it's cheaper. You've built a chip that does what it needs to do, but doesn't need to be like a 5 nanometer chip.
Mm-hmm. All right, so help me out then, because it sounded like you were saying a couple of things there. The problem is that we don't have enough of those older design chips. The problem is we don't have the capacity to make more. The problem is we don't have the machines to make more.
Right. There are companies that make the machines that make the chips.
Right.
And those companies are having trouble supplying them to the companies that want to make the chips, either because the parts for those chip making machines don't exist, or just because the demand is so high that they haven't been able to meet it. And again, those chip making machines are sometimes 10 years old or older, and so they're not able to produce them as quickly as they need to produce them in order to produce this sort of generation 2 or 3 back chips that they're trying to make.
You know what this reminds me of a bit? It reminds me of a few years ago when everything needed flash memory, and there wasn't enough flash memory to go around, and so fabs would come online and make, just gobs of flash memory, and suddenly flash sticks were coming like free in breakfast cereal. I mean, there was so much, there was so much of it made to account for demand that then they were cheap as, pardon my use of the term, they were cheap as chips. And then all of a sudden, it's like, well, let's take some of this flash capacity offline again, and then you'd have that problem again. Are we looking at a thing where once we finally catch up with demand for chips, then they're just going to be like, you're like wading knee deep in chips everywhere you go because they, caught up with capacity with a vengeance?
I mean, I'm not qualified to answer that question definitively, but I will say that one thing that stuck out to me in the article is that as we build electric cars, the demand for chips in those vehicles is something like 30 times the number of chips that are required in a gas-powered vehicle. So it's demand for new stuff, and Internet of Things, of course, too. So there are new things that are coming along asking for those older chips. But yeah, certainly you run the risk of saying, all right, well, we've spent 2, 3, 4, 5 years building up those fabs, and then the people who are actually putting chips into devices have adjusted to the level of supply that's available, and now there's way too many. And, I personally look forward to getting chips in my breakfast cereal because that sounds great.
More of our conversation with Shelly in just a moment, but first I want to tell you about another show that I do. It is called The Checklist. It is brought to you by Secure Mac. Every week we talk about computer security issues. Sometimes it's big news of the day, sometimes it's how-tos or how-to-nots. Really, every story that we bring, we try to bring with a call to action. There is a bad thing happening. Here is what you can do to avoid it. There is a bad thing you've done. Here is what you can do to fix it. Not a bad thing you've done, but you get the idea. Show's been going for about 5 years now, and if you have not listened to it yet, I really wish you would. And I wish you would tell friends about the show as well. What we're trying to do is help. Give it a listen. See what you think. The show is called The Checklist. It is brought to you by Secure Mac. You can find it wherever you find podcasts or go straight to the source, by which I mean the show's site, securemac.com/checklist. Back now with our conversation with Shelly Brisbin, talking about the chip shortage and one day lack thereof, maybe. Really quickly, in that article that you were reading, does any of this also have to do, do the chips not exist, or is it the chips are being hoarded, or is it they can't get from point A to point B because of, the 973 ships waiting outside the Los Angeles harbor? Is this all about making them, or is any of this about the logistics of getting them where they need to go as well?
It seems to be about making them, because one of the folks they interviewed who actually makes these chips and needs devices to make them has plants in various parts of the world. So it seems like that. And in fact, they're building a new fab in Japan specifically for these older type chips. And it feels weird to me to say older, because they're older in the sense that they're not going to be powering your iPhone, but they're going to be in your iPhone. But yeah, they're not as thin and fancy. But I didn't find anything in that article that indicated it was about moving stuff from point A to point B. That could certainly be part of the issue, but it's not something that MIMS took up.
How much Christmas shopping do you do?
As little as I can get away with.
All right, yeah. See, there are teenagers. Well, one's preteen and one's a teenager. There are people for whom I, shop, who, like, things I would have gotten them a year or two ago are probably off the table this year.
Yeah.
Either because those things aren't available. I mean, which honestly is fine, because it ends up being a thing that gets played with for a little bit and then stopped. I'm honestly thinking, and I don't mean to be hippy dippy about it, but I'm honestly thinking handmade gifts this year. Not necessarily made by me, but I'm thinking more gifts for the Luddite kind of thing.
A friend of mine who is a fellow public media journalist in his day job, has a good Twitter follow, but he said, "What if we just bought fewer things?" And I wrote back and I said, the heads of every person I know in tech journalism just exploded.
No, I mean, honestly, I sort of get it. At the same time, I do want the latest and greatest. Is he so worth following on Twitter that you want to say who he is and what his Twitter handle is? Because I'm always looking for somebody who actually provokes thought as opposed to provokes anger.
I mean, I will tell you that he provokes thought. I will also tell you that there is an awful lot of Austin, Texas specific content in there.
All right.
So maybe not. His name is Matt Largey. So if anybody is interested, I believe it's just Matt Largey, Largey. But all right. A smart guy.
At Matt Largey. So there was, I don't know there are like three other ways I want to go. When you say there are so many chips and the cars that are being made today, the electric cars specifically, again, and not to be so much of a Luddite, but I'm kind of annoyed that I had a car that eventually I was not able to drive anymore because though it passed emissions, there was a check engine light and there was a thing. It took me like 6 months to find anybody that could actually read it. The car was so old, and that's what it was a chip. There was a chip in there, and once they finally figured out what it was going to cost too much money, and so I had to put it out to pasture, which was kind of a bummer. Is anybody thinking about redesigning so that we don't have quite as much in the way of electronics, in the way of chips and things like that? Or is it just like, man, I can't wait until, again, there are so many that you can't move?
I mean, that's the sort of thing I worry about. I don't know whether that is occurring or not. I just worry about that in general in terms of, okay, we're going to drive computers now. So all the issues related to reliability of computers and repairability of computers are just going to transfer over to cars, which is not necessarily answering your question, but it's something for us to worry about when we're all like, oh, we have electric cars. Isn't that great? We're not wasting gas anymore. Yeah. All right, now what are we going to worry about?
I saw a fascinating thing on Twitter the other day. I can't remember who said it, but it was everybody's talking about Apple's electric car. The Apple car is going to be to the car as the iPhone is to the phone. Indication being, we don't even think about the iPhone as a phone anymore. I mean, it used to be that what a phone was for making phone calls, maybe getting text messages. And now everything we do on the iPhone is so far removed from what we think of as a phone, it's kind of funny that we call it that. And this person was saying, that's what Apple Car is going to be. And I'm like, okay, am I still going to be able to go places?
I was going to say, so that means it's going to fly? And
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what it is. I think you actually, you leave work and you just go to sleep and it drives you around. Maybe makes you dinner.
There you go. You just live in it, or it teleports you or something. I mean.
Yeah, it just finds a place to park and you're good for, you're good until back to the salt mines.